Here we are, everybody, coming in red hot to the Pat Flynn Show for another live stream. We are back again with Freaky Friday.
It's Friday, man.
Which means
Halloween.
we're getting freaky the day before Halloween. For some live Q&A, we are here to answer any and all questions that you want to send our way. I apologize that we started early. We said 3 o'clock, but then Jim and I were like, let's just do it. Let's just
do
go.
it. Schedule opened up. Let's go.
Yeah. Right. So we'll warm up here. We'll chat a little bit before we head to the questions. I see there's lots of good stuff there already. But yeah, gentle listeners, please send in whatever you have. Anything is fair game. Give us something.
Anything.
Give us something weird and interesting today.
Exactly.
Weirdest question gets some sort of prize. We'll do that.
So
you go ahead. You go ahead. You go ahead.
We can get into the stuff that was triggering me before if you want, but
yeah.
So my kids and I have been watching the X-Files. Did I tell you this?
No.
No. So we started watching the X-Files, like the whole run of it, and we got to the end of season 1, and it made me think, Mulder was pretty much right about everything, like not just in the show, but like, because the end of season 1, spoiler, if you haven't watched X-Files.
I haven't. How big of a spoiler is this? Because now I'm interested.
It's big. Well, it's big, but I mean, it's basically torn from today's headlines. So it turns out the government's been lying about UFOs and like making spooky viruses using like gain of function research, right? So I want to get like t-shirts that say, Mulder was right.
Yeah. Well, you know what? We'll sell them on philosophy for the people. If anybody wants a Mulder was right. Yeah. Why don't we start off? I want to do 2 things before we get to the Q&A, so people keep the questions coming in. I want to do what are Pat and Jim reading and studying thing. Just catch up on that. And then I also want to do like what has triggered Jim lately.
Among many things, I've been triggered a lot this week with you.
Yeah, man. It's been trigger fest over in Jim's world for many reasons.
I'm mad as hell, and I'm not taking any more, Pat.
End it right here. One of the we were talking about this, like the absurdity that is the fitness industry, and these Q&As largely veer into philosophy, which I love, but it is important that we take care of business in the fitness world. And
exactly, we
kind of came at something of something of a realization that we were talking about the old P90X program, right? And yes, it had so much hyperbolic marketing and this stuff about muscle confusion, which is, for more or less a made up term, but it's not like completely detached from reality either.
And Tony Horton is the Jim Carrey of fitness, right? I mean,
yeah, and I think what we said was that, for all the crap that gets from like the real experts in the field, it's not that bad of a program. No. It's really not, like, of all the things that like I would want to criticize in the fitness industry, P90X is like it really doesn't even make the list, to be honest, right?
And I mean, so like I think we outed each other, right?
Yeah.
And now we're doing it publicly. We both admit to having done P90X.
Yeah, I and this will, I guess, date me somewhat, but I would do P90X with my girlfriend in early college, and we loved it. It was a solid. It was I would do it. I was also teaching kettlebells and stuff there, but she really loved it. She liked the intensity of it, and you know what? Say whatever else you want again about the personalities and the marketing. Good, like just basic push-pull exercises, calisthenics, some good mobility, and like a quite sensible dietary program to P90X.
And with P90X, okay, so when it was the big rage, I still had this like mass like powerlifting setup in my garage, and this buddy of mine, JP Price is his name, who actually went on to set like some pretty legit world records in raw powerlifting. I think he was one of the first like raw at 900 pounds. JP, if you're out there, let us know.
Yeah, dude. Say
like seriously, like very accomplished athlete in the strength world. And he was leading up to his wedding, and he wanted to do P90X. So I was like, well, hey, you're my bro. Let's do it. I'll do. And so here we'd like these 2 like breathy powerlifters, right? And at that point I had lost 100 pounds, but I was still very much into strength sports. And we did P90X. I'll tell you, it was hard as hell, and we got in great shape. We got in great shape doing it. And JP lost. There's a lot of jumping in it, and like the one thing that bothers the stress factors I have in my back is jumping. And so I had to sub out some of the jumping on the days. But I tell you, that is a legit program. And I think one of the things that marks P90X as, if you're out there like trying to decide if you're going to spend money on a program, is if the program says up front, you're gonna get in totally awesome shape, 6-pack abs, biceps to the ceiling, all this stuff, and it's gonna take you 10 minutes a day, and you'll barely have to change what you eat. And like, they'll often give you, here's a list of the crappy things I eat, and I'm still this swole, right? Did all that stuff. If it says that on the front, it's crap. It's crap. P90X says up front, this is gonna suck. It's gonna be really hard. It's X for extreme. Right?
You'll probably quit. Yeah,
you'll probably quit this thing, which it probably has a huge quit rate, right?
I'm sure.
Okay. Yeah, and it says up front, because anyone who says you're going to get in like awesome, like Tony Horton kind of physical condition in 20 minutes a day with barely changing your diet is lying to you.
Yeah, and let's be honest, I don't know Tony Horton, and gentle listeners, we'll get off this in a minute, but let us just have our catharsis here.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, like very, very probably, if not almost certainly, was Horton. Like Horton's physique was not built by P90X. That dude's clearly lifting weights. He's clearly a lift weighter. But again, like we talked about this before. Like I would feel perfectly okay for like recommending most people who are just looking for like a good at-home workout, go do P90X. And like you said, the fitness industry, part of the reason it's so awful is it's sort of a race to the bottom in terms of hyperbolic marketing, right? It's like, this guy said you can get abs in 8 minutes. We have to show how to get it in 6, right?
Yeah.
And it's it's just absurdity upon absurdity. Yeah. And so like, I guess the thing about P90X I appreciate is like, they were still hyperbolic, but they kind of went in the other direction.
Yeah.
And like, this is actually just going to be really tough and you're going to hate it. But of course there's kind of the reverse psychology at play there where people are like, oh, I'm a tough guy. I thought about being in the Navy SEAL once. Sign me up, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I like the really good programs that I've done over the years have always kind of led with, hey, this is going to take a certain commitment to do this up front, right? And they weren't selling they weren't selling ease, right? They were selling effectiveness.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Because if you want ease, here's the deal: you don't get in shape through ease. All right. What? Yeah. Now one of the downsides of P90X is like, Beachbody, the company that produced it, like that was like a pretty cheesy pyramid scheme too, though. Right. Like it wasn't the whole thing.
Dude, I knew a lot of people in that. Yeah.
Yeah. You're supposed to, so there was a weird cult-like thing going on there. But I do think overall their products, if you got those programs, as cheesily marketed as they are, as much as bad spandex, big hair stuff going on in those things, right?
Those are the parts I'm fine with.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, that's pretty right. It has its rewards that if you follow those programs to the T, you would get in shape. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Good. Okay. We just needed to get that off our chest. Yeah. We're going to do a deeper episode on that. And Jim's got a new favorite YouTube fitness celebrity he's real hot on right now.
Exactly.
We're going to do a series on him.
He's changing my life.
So stay tuned for that. All right. Before we get to questions and I see more stuff coming in, keep it coming, guys. I just wanted to go through some stuff that some reading that I'm going to try and get through hopefully this week or the next 2 weeks. And then Jim, I'd be curious what you've got on your desk. So we got Mercusa, working my way through Mercusa here, and we're going to do a series on him coming up here probably very soon on Philosophy for the People. So, and we're just going to try and be as fair as we can in evaluating this interesting and very influential piece of work, One-Dimensional Man. This just came in. This book has gotten a lot of attention recently, so I couldn't resist. It's not an area of mine that I'm like super interested in, but Bill Craig's new book. And this thing's a heifer. This is thick. So I might be ambitious for trying to get through this in a week.
My buddy Matt Ramage, whom you know, right?
I do. Yeah, he's been on the show.
That is Matt's specialization. And he's not the biggest Bill Craig fan to begin with, but he does think that book is legit and is excited about it. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, there's already been a number of reviews out where it's very clear that people have not seriously engaged it. And look, this is my policy. If I'm going to talk about something, I better have read it, right?
Be a scholar.
Better have read it. So I'm going to try and get through that. And then finally, this one has been sitting around. I have not got through it yet. This is Therese Corey's book on Aquinas, on human self-knowledge. So I'm finally going to get through that because she's going to be on the show here next month. So
nice.
Looking forward to that. What about you, Jim? What are you reading?
So Marcuse, right?
Yep.
It's our common. I like that we now tend to have a common project, a reading project.
Yeah.
It's great. I am finishing up John Salas's lectures on Merleau-Ponty. Okay, which is I think going to kick off what'll probably be like a year-long deep dive into Merleau-Ponty's work, right?
Sure,
and I'm going to be teaching on him in the spring, so that's the start of it, right? I have a couple books today, hopefully arriving today, from Barnes and Noble because Amazon won't sell them, right? Written by the
this
Russian.
This is how Jim decides what to read. What is Amazon banned?
Yeah, written by the Russian Heideggerian political philosopher Alexander Dugin, right? So I'm probably going to like end up going nuts with those two books this weekend. Yeah. So
yeah, excellent, very cool. All right, should we head to some questions then?
Let's do it.
All right, Raj says, my bad, I use my YouTube account. Something funky is going on because I checked the stream this morning and there was a number of questions that are now gone. I don't know what happened, and they were good ones too, which is a shame because one was about Plotinus and there was something else about pull-ups. So whoever posted those, know that I don't delete it. I would never delete anything unless like you're really just being a vile, repugnant fool. But YouTube apparently just does that sometimes. So I don't know why that is. So apologies, and you can always repost it. What up, Horseman? Friend Horseman is here. Horseman says, your thinking about religion seems to be strongly rooted in the tradition of rational Aristotelian thought. I am curious about your perspective on the mystical tradition, Master Eckhart, John of the Cross, and those guys. Jim, have you engaged much with either of those or any of the other significant mystics in the Catholic tradition?
Yeah, I've read both of them. I guess I'd want to divide the question here a little bit, though. Like, you're thinking about religion seems to be strongly rooted in the tradition of a rational Aristotelian thought. In fact, I think my thinking about religion is not at all rooted in Aristoteliaanism, right? In fact,
yeah, Jim and I differ in how we think about certain things.
No, I actually think on this we don't, right? I mean, like Aristotle is not talking about organized religion, right? Do you see what I mean? In fact, like if you read the Metaphysics, he's pretty dismissive of that kind of thing, right? I mean, he begins, talking about how the poets don't want you doing natural theology, right? Because you think that it's kind of not what the religion of Athens says we should be doing, and he talks about demythologizing in certain ways throughout the Metaphysics. Do you know what I mean? So I mean, like, you get my point. I mean, if what you mean by religion is like my adherence to an organized religion, right? My taking up religious practice. That has nothing to do with Aristotle. You could be utterly irreligious in that way and be an Aristotelian.
Yeah.
Do you see? You know what I mean? Now, it might be that Aristotelian opens the door to like questions that, like make you start looking into these religious traditions, right? But I don't see myself as like, I actually think to be a strict Aristotelian about religion, right, would lead one to be not terribly religious in anything that we recognize as religious. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. You're taking this from a different perspective than I was thinking about it. Right. Yeah.
If what the listener means is, does Aristotle inform how I think about divinity? Yes. Right. Okay. Do you see that? Okay. But in that way, it's not clear how much, like, so St. John of the, like, if you want to go play it, let's go play it for a second. Like what St. John of the Cross is talking about and what Meister Eckhart is talking about, it's not clear how far off that is from a Plotinian sense, right? Of apophatism and the one and all that. And then there's interesting questions about how different that is from Plato and Aristotle, right? Okay. So I don't see that mystical tradition as running contrary to like what I'm taking from the Greeks. Right. In fact, I think it sits pretty comfortably with it. Right. Okay. Does that make sense? Right. And also this goes above my pay right now, but there's also like my understanding is Meister Eckhart saw himself as kind of like the inheritor of what Thomas was up to. You know what I mean? And Thomas has got some pretty spooky mystical strains to him too. Right. So I think a lot of this, like, kind of like wanting to see John of the Cross and Meister Eckhart and the mystics over there, and then like kind of like the Platonist and Aristotelian schools over here in theology. I think that's all very artificial division. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with you on that. I just am not as well steeped within either of the thought of those two to really speak intelligently about it. I've been told that I'm not allowed to read John of the Cross until I'm 54 anyways. It's kind of like,
I'll tell you,
it's like you, who was, that's right. I wasn't allowed to start phenomenology until I was 45. Yeah.
No, I was getting pretty deep into John of the Cross at one point, and I kind of eventually shelved and said, look, I need to wait on this, right? I need to work up to this, right? And now
I'm only being somewhat sarcastic. Like, people have seriously advised that. They're saying, like, hold off on John of the Cross until
And now, like, you can obviously see in recent years, I've started to get back into Eckhart and Cross and John of the Cross, people like that.
Yeah, cool. Good question. All right, we're gonna keep going through here. Con Liad says, as a tall bro, 6'6", who strength trains recreationally, is a combination of trap bar deadlifts and lunges, step ups a worthy substitute for back squats? So, I mean, it always depends what you're training for. So I'll say right off the bat, if you're training for a powerlifting competition where you need to back squat, the answer is no. It's not a worthy substitute, right?
If you're going to compete in the gymnastic rings, you'll have to train in the gymnastic rings.
So, but if you're just asking, hey, can I build, robust general physical preparedness with these lower body exercises, trap bar deadlift, lunges, and step ups? Definitely. And I don't think you need back squats in there. In fact, I almost never back squat these days, and I love the trap bar, especially for people of certain dimensions. In fact, I just love it in general. I think it's a great tool. And the unilateral work, the lunges, the step ups, and I would even add, if you're open to I guess just agony, higher rep, heavy Bulgarian split squats are some of the best single leg exercise you can do. So from that perspective, yes, absolutely. From the other perspective of specialization, no, there's no substitute. Yeah.
And I agree 100%. It's funny, when I saw a tall bro here, because I'm a little thick headed, I thought, like, tall bro, is that like some kind of ethnicity? Like, what? and then I got to the 6 foot. Oh, I get, okay. So I'm not very bright. Anyway, in the question, it's a good question, and I agree 100% with Pat's answer. But you have the question is, are these exercises a worthy substitute for the back squat, right? And this is something I've noticed a lot lately is it's almost become this like, the barbell lifts or the quick lifts in weightlifting have become this sort of like, you have to do these things in order to, like, be a tough guy, right? Or you have to like these particular modalities of working out have become somehow very important to, like, our sense of, like, toughness or masculinity and stuff like that. Did you sort of, you know what I mean? And, like,
I do.
And, like, I mean, I would say, look, almost everybody who landed at Iwo Jima had never bench pressed in his life.
Right.
This is true. What I mean? And I'm finding this to be a kind of a strange phenomenon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I love those lifts. I've spent a lot of my time working very hard on those lifts. And, but I mean, you could be a very, very disciplined, tough, very resilient, dangerous human being and never touch those lifts in your entire life. Right. And I think unless you are trained for powerlifting, you have to ask yourself, what am I actually getting out of these things? Because there's a downside to all.
Yeah. If you want strong, really well shaped legs, glutes, etc., a combination of trap bar and, I would say, Bulgarian split squats is going to give you everything you need, honestly. And it's going to spare your back in ways that I think the risk to return ratio with the barbell back squat just becomes increasingly questionable. Right. Increasingly questionable.
Especially when you get strong. Right. It gets dangerous. Yeah. That's why I don't do it anymore, right? Because I cannot do it in moderation. Like, I know, right? Okay.
I mean, it's one of those exercises where the weight is being just laid directly on the stanchion of your skeleton, right? And eventually, as you get strong, it is a considerable amount of weight, right? It's not even so much a matter of if, just when something's going to go wrong with that, right? Mm-hmm.
But look, if you're playing football, the other guy is going to do this, so you got to do it now. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so that's just part of the opportunity of risks that you're going to do if you're playing football or, a lot of other sports. Or if my job was, I had to be able to kick a door down, right? If I had that kind of work, I would probably still squat. It's just but once again, now that I don't squat, it's not like with a barbell, right? It's not as if, I've become unworthy. Right. Yeah.
Jim unworthy? No. All right, next question. Here we go. I want to ask Pat, but we're going to include Jim here because he's here as well. How can you have faith in Catholicism given the fact that there are so many smart historians and philosophers putting forward heavy criticism towards it? This is a multi-part question. And I want to ask why you are a Christian instead of just a philosophical theist. If the answer is a historical evidence for the resurrection, would you still be a Christian if the evidence was weaker, say if we didn't have Paul's conversion or Mark's gospel, etc.? Yeah, good question. Let me answer this in a couple of ways, and then we'll just turn this into a conversation with Jim. I mean, the first one is a general question, right? It's this question of sort of disagreement among peers, right? And this is an interesting philosophical question because this is not unique to Catholicism. It's not unique to Christianity. It's widespread on anything, right? Any position, any philosophical position is going to have smart people who disagree. That's just the nature of it, right? So this is a very interesting epistemological question. I have to say it's never really bothered me. I mean, because like when I think when you go to the end of the rainbow on certain things, I question of like whether they're really peers. You know what I mean? Like, look, like Graham Oppie, he's a smart guy, but when I read him next to Alex Perouse and Josh Rasmussen and other guys, like it just seems to me that one side has the better arguments at the end of the day. So like at the end of the day, that's it for me. It's not that there's smart people who disagree. It's that I weigh the evidence as best as I can. I weigh the arguments as best as I can. And it seems to me that this is true. And that's it. And do I take seriously smart people who disagree? Yeah, I try to seek them out to make sure that I don't have any major blind spots. But it's never been like a major source of worry for me that smart people disagree, because it's always been known to me, no matter what my positions have been, even as they have changed, that there just are always and always will be smart people who disagree. Right. Anything you want to add to that part?
No, 100%. I mean, the fact of disagreement does not entail anything, right? But the fact of disagreement. Okay. So I agree with you. Just because there's disagreement on an issue doesn't mean you can't take a side in the disagreement, right? Now there is the risk that am I just picking sides based on my bias on this? Okay, but then that's why we have inquiry, to try to detect our own BS, right?
Right.
I do think though, if you do believe that there are smart, well-intentioned people on both sides of the debate, and you don't have a really good error theory, right, to explain the side that you deny, right, that may maybe just as a psychological effect play some role in diminishing your level of certainty, right? You know what I mean? Like where I admit, look, there are perfectly reasonable, smart people in touch with the same evidence as I am, who are drawing a contrary conclusion. They're wrong. I think I can show they're wrong. All that. But the fact that they are smart and well intentioned, that's got to be, it's hard to ignore that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Of course,
but that doesn't mean you're not justified. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean you should doubt that belief. But I do think, and this I think an important thing is like to say that we have the exact same certainty that our ancestors had about a lot of this stuff. I think it's hard to say because they are not necessarily acquainted with smart, well-intentioned people with the same data in front of them, coming to different conclusions. Right.
Yes. Right.
But that does not in any way, shape, or form to say you are not rationally licensed to make the inference to the conclusion that reason leads you to. Do you see my point?
I do. Yeah. It's a good point. Let's take the next part. So the next question was about Christianity. If the answer is historical evidence for the resurrection, then would you still be a Christian if the evidence was weaker? Yeah. Let's broaden this, because I am not a Christian just because I'm not, first off, I'm just not a relevant scholar in historical studies. Obviously, I've looked at and studied the evidence and the critics as best I can. I read N.T. Wright, and then I see what Bart Ehrman has to say, and all these guys, right? And again, I think that it lands pretty decisively on one side, right? At least for me, I've never been able to find a naturalist explanation that can explain the full range of data in a way that I can honestly take seriously, right? But it's not just that, right? And the naturalists can maybe explain some of the data in various ad hoc ways, but you always want to look for the best, simplest theory. But here's the deeper consideration for me. And Jim, I think you'll probably go with me at least a ways on this one, because I know we sometimes think about these things differently. When we do large-scale comparisons of large-scale theories, worldviews, right? What are we doing, right? Well, we're looking at certain tensions in worldviews. That's what we're looking at. Both tensions, we look at tensions, and we also look at predictions, predictive success, stuff like that, right? Now, all worldviews have various tensions, right? And roughly speaking, we're talking about coherence here. Coherence just refers to how things kind of like fit together, if we can see that things fit nicely together. So tensions are just parts of a worldview where we don't see where things fit together. Now, the worst tension you can get, the worst form of incoherence, is a contradiction. That's where we see that something does not fit together. And that's like an immediate death blow for any worldview. Now, as it happens, though, people can usually tweak their worldviews easily enough to get out of a contradiction without maybe giving up all their fundamental commitments. So then it really just kind of becomes a game of kind of like tallying up the tensions and costs, right? That's really what the game is. And to my mind, the most coherent worldview is not just theism, but it's Catholicism. Now, why is that? Because I think atheism has enormous tensions, maybe even generates a contradiction. Josh Rasmussen has been doing interesting work on this, which is pushing it farther than most theists wants to go, but it has enormous tensions. It's horribly impoverished from an explanatory standpoint. And if you were to ask me, why theism, I think theism gives the best story ontologically, and it gives the best story epistemologically, securing our status as knowers, including scientific knowers. From there, I think theism makes certain predictions. And it's those predictions that cause me to take Christianity very seriously. If I do my philosophy of God and I get to God as pure actuality and subsistent goodness, which I think I can do, and I look at the world and see that things have gone like really screwy, like if you just grant that something like the fall really seems to have happened, then also like God's goodness leads me to expect that God wouldn't be indifferent to that some type of rescue mission begins to make sense. And then if I go out into the world and I see data that matches up with that type of prediction, say like historical evidence for this miraculous claim of the resurrection and incarnation atonement, that counts really strongly in favor of that hypothesis because it makes those predictions. And what I'm saying here is there's a sharing of the epistemic burden. The philosophical anticipations, predictions, and expectations alleviate or share the epistemic burden of just having to do just like pure historical exegesis, right? So for me, it's more the philosophy of God and the certain predictions that I think flow naturally from theism that did most of the work for me of becoming Christian. And then it's just seeing like, are there any like clear defeaters of the Christian narrative historically, which I don't think there are, right? There's interesting puzzles and objections, but no clear defeaters. And it's that sharing of the epistemic burden that I think people seriously miss out on. And it's what makes the best sense of our total understanding and what is the worldview that is most coherent. And to my mind, it's the Catholic worldview. That's why I'm Catholic. So there's my long-winded, blowhard answer, Jim. So chime in with whatever you want there. Yeah.
And so, okay, so the question was, to what degree does one hold the Christianity based on historical evidence? Was that it?
Right? Yeah, and if it was weaker, say if we say we didn't have Corinthians or the Gospel of Mark or whatever, if we just didn't have that evidence, would you abandon Christianity?
Yeah, and as you know, in my case, I don't see those as particularly good evidence. Okay, right. So, and so wait, there was something in the first part. Can you put the question back up? Do you mind?
Yes, let me find it here. This one?
Yeah. Okay. If the answer is historical evidence of the resurrection, then would you still be a Christian if the evidence was, and it was considerably weaker? Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would, because my being a Christian is not really tied to my favorable assessment of that evidence, right? In fact, I don't have a terribly like optimistic assessment of that evidence as licensing an inference to the occurrence of the resurrection, right? And it's not that I think there's extremely good evidence against it. I find the issue to be ultimately inscrutable. Okay. And for like kind of technical reasons that you'd have to like set certain background probabilities that I'm just not sure it's within our ken to be able to do that. Right. But I also think, I actually just thought this yesterday, is if like justification in being a Christian, right? It required the application like of Bayes' theorem. Like we have to, because like
gotta rev that Bayes machine, baby.
Yeah, so
make it go, make it go burr.
Yeah, I mean, but as you know, I love these debates, but it's a parlor game, right?
It is a game. There's just philosophical games.
Yeah,
there are.
Yeah, because think of it like the idea is, well, okay, no, I can show you the Christian is justified in believing the resurrection because if we apply these principles of probabilistic calculus, right, to this, we can see that, the probability comes out right. Okay. And then the reply is, no, you've missed it. Like there's this other principle of probabilistic calculus that we apply this, it comes out the other way, and it goes on and on and on. We keep getting deeper and deeper and deeper, more technical issues. And is the claim literally that in order to see whether or not, in order to be justified, you'd have to go through that dialectical process, right? Mm-hmm. Well, then there's about 4 people in the world who are reasonable Christians. Then.
Yeah. And this is why Plantinga's work is so significant.
Yeah, this is why Plantinga's work is interesting. And there's a lot of other from other traditions and stuff like that. So when I find myself getting sucked into playing the Bayes, parlor game of this, and as you know,
the Bayesian tennis match, let's say.
Yeah, as you know, I love me some Bayesian tennis match, right? Okay, but like I like to ride my bike too, right? Right. Okay. So I like strategy games too. Okay, right. And so it says if that's what evidential analysis requires, then it would seem the transmission of Christianity has had nothing to do with evidential stuff from the beginning until just like a few lucky, analytic philosophers today, right? So I don't buy it. I just don't buy it. It just seems to me, and that's why even though I have a fairly low view of, not a low view, I don't think the Bayesian game, the probabilistic game, comes out decisively in favor of Christianity. That doesn't trouble me because I think you have to look at this as we're doing 2 different things here.
Yeah. Right? I feel like I land somewhere between you and Richard Swinburne on this. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right.
Because Swinburne's like, hey, you're like an error, man.
Yeah. Like some of the numbers people assign on these Bayesian tennis matches are they just seem ridiculous to me. Right. Yeah. But I think we can ask, can we have a broad degree of expectation of what we might expect on a particular hypothesis versus another hypothesis, right? Yeah. And we can and I think that can do a lot of work without getting into these honestly ridiculous games, right? Yeah. And then even for Catholicism, though, there's certain things that just like fit really well. I love we talked about the idea of fittingness, right? Yeah. Where what are we, right? And as philosophers, you have to be good generalists. It can't just be philosophy of God. We have to think about epistemology, philosophical anthropology. We're rational animals, yes, but we're rational social dependent animals that rely on tradition and authority. And so like something like a religion that is tradition bound starts to make a lot of epistemological sense given human nature. Again, this is something that sort of just fits really well, which again, to me, lends, just call it, say it lends various degrees of rational plausibility.
Yeah. And so, I mean, and this is how I think about this stuff, right? And so, so for me though, I don't see that as I can say, hey, human rationality requires a tradition. There's a tradition. I'll jump into that. Okay. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's that easy, right? I think you have to in some way, like if it feels like a kind of consumer choice. I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but if it feels like a kind of consumer choice, it's not a tradition then, right? Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like almost like by coming to see it as a tradition, we almost wreck it as a tradition, right? But I do think this is true, right? That in order for us to be reasonable at all, we have to come online within a given set of practices, a tradition, picking up something where it left off. Okay, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm, and so if you asked me, like, why am I a Catholic? I didn't have a choice in it. I got thrown into it, and it makes sense of the world. Right. It's the structure. It is the lens by which I can see things. Right. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that seems to me is like,
and you've had no strong reasons to abandon it. Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I said, I partied in my 20s, but I mean, that's
you had your period of being Irish and then you came back. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so, yeah. And you get for me, what holds it in place is because it is the tradition, right? It's the stream of life, to use Wittgenstein's notion on this, which I think is right, that gives my words meaning, right? Okay. Right. And it's that practice that lets me see the real reality of things, right? Okay. Right. And I admit you wouldn't see this reality if you weren't in that tradition, okay? Yeah. But if you're in it, you can see it. right?
Right.
Yeah.
And there is a point though, and I think you would agree with this, Jim. If not, just say it, because this doesn't have to be the agreement cast. And already we're seeing how we think about these things differently.
And we've never been about that, right?
Yeah. No, this is not the agreement cast, right? I think it is important at some point that you make these things explicit to yourself, because you're right.
Yeah.
We're born into a certain structure, right? It's not like we're born and we get to see, oh, look at all these traditions. Let me pick one. No, it's just, this stuff is all structural, right? But the true philosophical life is to begin to make these things explicit, and then realize that things can go wrong on the level of interpretation, right? Even within religious communities. Now, religious communities are epistemological frameworks that help to form people's beliefs, their belief forming mechanisms, right? But things can go wrong on levels of interpretation. Not all of these traditions can be correct, right? Because they make mutually conflicting claims. So at some point, we do have to ask ourselves, well, how do I engage in reasonable belief revision processes, right? I had to do that, and I changed many of my beliefs, because even though I was, just your kind of, I guess, mainstream secularist, right? That's still a tradition in many respects, deeply informed by a religious culture in many ways, right?
That is McIntyre's central argument of whose justice with rationality is liberalism. It means modern secularism is no less a tradition than the tradition, right?
Exactly. So you can't. Yeah, it's like philosophy. You can't escape it. You can just escape doing it well, or you can just escape having the better framework, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, good question, and a lot of considerations.
Can I add something to that? So
yeah, please.
This is all over the new book, right? My new book.
I'm pumped. That's awesome.
I think, and it's not just me. I'm like drawing a lot of people, right? Okay, but for us, for humans to be like rational in the human way, I see it in terms of a threefold responsibility. Okay, like, because we have to come online in a tradition, our first thing is we have to be responsible to the form of life we've inherited, right? Like, I have to, first of all, take it up and learn it, and learn how to see with it, right? And so that I'm not just making up the world for myself. So I have to be responsible to the tradition I find myself in, right? But then I have to, this is your point, right? At some point, I have to authentically own that thing and say, I'm not holding this just because I happen to get dropped into it. I'm holding it also because it can survive rational scrutiny.
Yes.
Right. So I have to be responsible to my tradition, but then I have to hold my tradition responsible to the world.
Right.
So if you're saying like this thing couldn't go wrong, right? Then you've joined a cult. You don't have a tradition, right? You have to be willing to say, I'm going to actually look into this at some level, or at least hold out the possibility, like have enough separation from it that I could evaluate it, right? Okay. Then finally, I think you have to have a kind of responsibility to yourself in that, do I actually adhere to this tradition because it's good and just and right and true, or is there some other ulterior motive that I'm getting out of this?
Right.
Yeah. So I think like really what it is to be us and what it is to hold something, it's to be responsible to what we're given. It's to hold what we're given responsible to the world. And then it's to be honest to ourselves about why we hold to it. Right.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
And I think that's where freedom is.
No disagreement. No disagreement on that. Yeah. 100%. All right, Kyra, we'll take one more from you, then we'll get some other people in here just to be fair. He says, I feel like the honest position for a layperson is to be an agnostic. So much literature out there that I couldn't possibly read and understand given that I don't have the time and tools. Well, if that's the approach you take in life, man, then you're not going to get anywhere.
You're agnostic about everything.
Yeah, and like, let's not forget, like agnosticism, at least in the most broad sense, faces enormous epistemological difficulties, as Plantinga very well shows us in Warranted Christian Belief and elsewhere, right? If I don't know anything about the origins of my belief-forming mechanisms, blah, 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 Plantinga, you have some inscrutable, undefeated defeaters for your agnostic position, right? So agnosticism isn't just like danger-free zone. Let's be clear about that. Agnosticism itself has many philosophical issues, but I would just say from a practical level, that isn't what rationality is about. I had a Substack about this recently. Rationality is not about being correct, not necessarily. Rationality is about doing the best with the information that you have. So there's kind of a good a quote on this from Kenny Pierce. He says, think of like good card players, right? Occasionally, they're going to be dealt a bad hand, but good card players are good because they do the best with the hand that they're dealt. Being rational means knowing out of all the information you have, what is most relevant, and being wise and prudent in how you make your decisions and how you form your life and the action you take on that. You might just, through no fault of your own, just be missing information. Yep. And that information might be critical to solving the puzzle correctly. But that doesn't mean you're being irrational, right? Because it might not be your fault that you missed that information. So you could be perfectly rational even in being wrong, right, if you understand what rationality is. So this is why, like, I avoid these polemics of saying, like, if you're an atheist, you're irrational. No, because I think people can be rational pretty much almost in anything, given certain situations. Not automatically. I think people often are irrational because they're not doing very well with the hand that they're dealt. But I think rationality, we have to distinguish between being rational and being right. They're not exactly the same thing. Now, the goal should be to do the best you can with the best possible hand, to seek out the best information you can, of course, and try to consider everything that's relevant. But they're not the same thing. So, no, I don't think that the default position should be agnosticism. I'm kind of broadly Plantingian in this respect. I think,
Well, okay, two things on this, right? Mm-hmm. So, one, this question is exactly what I was worried about with, okay, how far down the Bayesian rabbit hole do I have to go before I can come to a conclusion with the resurrection, right? Did you know what I mean? Well, that's my point, you don't have to go down the rabbit hole at all, I think, at some point, right? Like you can only just go with the evidence in front of you, and you don't have to answer every possible objection. Do you know what I mean? So at some point, you're just going to have to take responsibility for the way you go with this. Did you see my point, right? And one more thing about tradition bound rationality. If we admit that rationality is tradition bound, right, that we have to begin with responsibility to a form of life we're given, right? Mm-hmm. But like what we're doing now is like systematically undermining every possible given form of life, right, in defense of some kind of radically free individual self, right? We're screwed.
Right.
We're utterly completely screwed. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
You know what I mean? So, and that's why I think this notion of the grounding of rationality in tradition is very, very, very important right now, because like there's a huge pressure now to just wipe everything clean and just turn loose these sort of little Kantian individuals, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Ain't no such thing.
Yeah, that is not who we are. Yeah, firm agreement right now. All right, good questions. I hope we answered them to at least some degree of satisfaction. Catholic Base calling out the intro music. Yeah, that's a Pat Flynn homebrew that you got coming in here. And he says, did you watch Apocalypse Now yet? No, I haven't. I admitted, I forget it was on Twitter or here, that I've actually never seen that movie.
Oh my gosh.
To my shame, I've never seen it. So
man, man, I've got some stuff on that. Yeah.
So
I've been thinking about writing about that movie.
Yeah. So we'll have to do one of those in our philosophy of insert movie here series, which we will be doing at some point. We've got ideas, gentle listeners. All right, let's keep going on here. Sorry, as soon as I like highlight one, I lose where I am here.
It's a moving target.
All right. Sam says, how can God be the foundation of reality and the personal God found in the Bible? Yeah, that's a very long question. I mean, what has Athens to do with Jerusalem is the question here, right? How do we reconcile the God of the philosopher with the God of religion? So I guess my lazy response here is just grab Eleanor Stump's wonderful book, The God of the Philosopher and the God of the Bible. And it's short, it's wonderful, but it's also thin because it was, I think, part of a lecture she gave. So it's a lecture series book. If you're seriously interested in that question, I think that Stump's introductory text there is really good. But yeah, I just have never really seen the conflict. It was, in fact, by getting to the God of the philosopher first that sort of opened me up to the possibility of there being a God of the Bible. And then seeing how certainly the Catholic think, like, this isn't anything new, right? Catholic thinkers throughout the tradition have always like wondered this, right? Because they have like the pagan philosophy kind of in their back pocket, and then revelation. And it, on the surface, there can seem to be certain tensions there. One seems to be utterly spooky and aloof. Another seems to be intimately related to creation, answering prayers, stuff like that.
Walking around.
Yeah, and so the way you
hiding
answer
behind
this,
rocks and stuff. Right?
Yeah, the way you answer this is carefully, right? Carefully with how you interpret and read the Bible, and careful with your models in philosophy of God. And I think if you just do that, you'll see that there's not only not any discord there, but actually deep harmony between the two. Yeah. So I don't know, Jim, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna add to that. Yeah.
Sam, I would also say check out. I forget when it was, but Gavin and I did do an extended talk on this. And one thing that we emphasize is like, you don't go to the Bible as a metaphysics textbook, right? That's just not what it's meant to be. So even though the harmonization can be done, if you're trying to like get your entire metaphysical structure just from Scripture, we would both say that that's just a mistake from part one. Yeah. All right. Alex says, Pat Flynn, I had a question about Plotinus. Hey, Alex, this is the one I was talking about. Just curious, did you delete that or did YouTube delete it? Because this has been an ongoing issue and I want to know the answer here. Does this I always have issue with this word. Hypostasises relate to the one and the many in your guys' context. I'm not sure if my OG question is up from earlier. No, it's not. It somehow got deleted. So let me think back to my Plotinus. Would this be the 5th tractate?
Yeah, I'd have to look this up. I don't know this one. I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, so let me go a little bit out of my lane because I'm not an expert on Plotinus. But my understanding is you have the one, you have intellect and soul with Plotinus, right? And the way it relates to him is a matter of just sort of ontological dependency. So he needs the one is the ultimate principle of unity. So that's how he's solving the one and the many. But kind of like from that flows the intellect, which you need for the forms. So he's drawing from Plato there because he's pretty convinced from Plato's Parmenides and his other work that you need this to make sense of the distinctness of forms. And then the soul kind of ties into emanation. Now, as just kind of as I guess a general philosophical project, people might find that okay, and even attractive in many respects. I would say from a Christian and certainly a classical theist project, we're gonna want to tidy some of that stuff up, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that even answers your question, but you get what you pay for here. Sam says, philosophy for the people. I don't know if this is accurate, but Aquinas and Augustine believe that humans have natural psychic powers to predict future events. Is this true? Yeah, no, I think I'm not as sure about Augustine, but Aquinas did believe that we may have natural psychic abilities that are either naturally weak or severely weakened by the fall.
Well, and I don't know that he's wrong about this either. So.
No, I think he's right. Right?
Good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's
right about everything, man.
Yeah, no, that is true. I think on both accounts that Aquinas did believe that, and I think it is. I just think it's also true, right? And there's some really interesting emerging research on psychic abilities too. And they're not what people typically think, right? Like yeah.
And if you had some leanings to panpsychism, this would make some good sense, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Jim, can you explain your modal skepticism?
I mean, I don't have a really sophisticated explanation. It's just that the further you get from the actual, I think the less certain I am of the claims we're making about the possible, right? Mm-hmm. Like the best proof of the possible is the actual. And the further you're getting from what I can relate back to the actual, the less certain I am that we haven't crossed into fantasy. Right. Mm-hmm. And you can say, well, the measure of possible is non-contradictory, but that's going to beg the question about what is or is not non-contradictory at the extreme, right? Especially when you throw in that, we now recognize metaphysical truths, not just logical truths being true across all possible worlds. There's a massive opportunity to beg some serious questions on that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No rock can turn into a prime minister, for example. Right.
Yeah. Right. And I think Van and Wagen stuff on this would kind of push me in that direction originally.
Yeah. I've had a lot of thoughts on this recently, especially as I wrote a couple of my articles on cosmological arguments. Can we jam on this for a minute, Jim? I'd be curious to explore your thoughts. Right. So definitely, right. If something's actual, it's possible. Right. So I'm on board with the S5. However, I do want to say, right, so like a certain modal skepticism seems to me to be strongly problematic, if not entirely self-defeating, right? So think about it like this, right? So say you're a naturalist and say that you think that there's just some like first necessary initial event and that led to everything that happened, right? Mm-hmm. And we have a universe with so many ergs of energy, right? And then you want to say, well, could there be, a universe with just one more erg of energy? Yeah. And then the naturalist is going to say, actually, no, that's impossible, right? Yeah. Given their sort of metaphysical constraints. And I want to say that's got to be wrong, right? That has to be wrong.
Yeah.
So I think we need to like think about this. The way I think about it now is there's a principle, and I'm borrowing from a couple different thinkers here, Spitzer and Rasmussen, and even some insights from O'Connor, right? There is a general principle. It's a defeasible principle of modal uniformity, right?
Yeah.
That things that are categorically alike, they're categorically alike, right? So, like,
I would still say to be arguing from the actual.
Yeah. So, but the way I think this is gonna, right. So if you think that, I mean, the actual is we have so many ergs of energy. Yeah. We know that's actual, but could we have one more, right? Yeah. I want to say definitely we could, right? Even if that's not actual yet. I mean, somebody might say that's a nearby possibility. I agree with that, right?
So I'm gonna go that's epistemically possible. For all we know, that could happen, right?
Right. Yeah.
But we don't know.
Yeah. And I want to be stronger with that. I want to say it really is possible, right? And that if you posit sort of your fundamental ontology posits some restriction that makes that impossible, then you've just made a possible reality an impossible reality. That's a contradiction. Your fundamental ontology has to go. You see, so I run it the other way. And now the trick here is, how do you make sure that one man's modus ponens doesn't become another man's modus tollens? And I think it's through two different moves. One is a principle of modal continuity, and two is a principle of defense of intuitions, right? So you do have to make some epistemological moves here. And you know me, Jim, I think that there's something of a sort of package deal when it comes to our faculties. And that includes intuitions, and intuitions include modal intuition. So unless I have some like good, pretty obvious defeater for something not being possible, the default position is, I think that we should be able to have one more erg of energy, a world with one more erg of energy, right? Yeah. Now, could I have a world with negative one ergs of energy? No, because that's relevantly different, right? Yeah. That's so it obviously doesn't run in all directions. You see what I'm saying? So this is kind of how my thoughts been developing on this.
But I think you have to have this like ceteris paribus clause in there, like all things being equal, right? If it's the same, it's the same, right? But there is that ceteris paribus in there, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why I think what we've done is we're moving there. For all I know, right, this is possible. But I do think for all I know this is possible is enough, right? So then, like, let's say going to like the actual, like we're basically talking about like fine tuning kind of argument here or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, for all I know, it's possible that there could have been other arrangements of, the basic constants or something like that, right? Well, then it does seem then you can't rule it out, right? And that's probably all the theist needs there, right? You know what I mean? It's like the conclusion's weakened, but the conclusion would still follow, right? You know what I mean? And it would still be up to it would shift the burden of proof and put on the atheist to give us some reason to think that the for all we know clause hasn't been met, right?
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So dialectically, I think that's absolutely
I don't think it makes it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And you know what I mean? And I also be careful, like I'm not a modal skeptic. I mean, I think I know I can make some distinctions between the actual and the possible and the necessary, right? Mm-hmm. I just, when you start getting to very remote possible worlds, right? Like that Kripkean language, right? Like those very remote possible worlds, I'm doubting those are accessible to me, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And exactly where we like lose accessibility, I don't know, right? It's probably a degree thing, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't find myself entertaining lots of scenarios of what it would be like in worlds where time ran backwards or something like that. You know what I mean? Yeah, right.
Right. The other aspect of modal skepticism here is just thinking about it as an essentialist versus how so many modern analytic thinkers think about it too.
Exactly.
And there, I think Jim and I agree on the general critiques.
You got possible worlds where there's frogs that are chickens, right?
Yeah, right. 100%. Good. Yeah, good questions. All right, let's take a couple more here. Jim, any are sticking out to you? Here's a fitness one.
Yeah. Let's see what we got here.
Matt said, if you had a choice between two Kettlebell King adjustable kettlebells, 12 to 32, or a set of power blocks adjustable to 90 pounds each, which would you choose? I've used neither, but I will say this. If they're actually blocky, I wouldn't get them. That's what, I mean, unless you're just going to do swings, in which case, I don't know. Why limit yourself like that? The adjustable kettlebells have always seemed to me to just be so poorly shaped that they're almost you can't even use them for most of the exercises you want to do, right?
I've never touched one. Yeah, and that's why I would just go. Okay, it's 12K to 32K adjustable, right? Just go get a 24K, right? I'd rather have one kettlebell, stable, good one, in the middle than all those, and just do all the fun variations to get the most out of it I can. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. I think if you just get a 124 kilogram, what's that? Inverted gear kettlebell.
Invertedgear.com.
Invertedgear.com/PatFlynn15. Let me bring it up. I have to do it for our boy Nelson.
There you go, Nelson.
Go get yourself a 15% discount. Support the sponsor. Support the show.
Dear listener, you're welcome.
And there's a lot to be said about that. Again, there's so much to be learned when you sort of almost artificially restrict yourself when you don't have to, right? Just give yourself a 24 kilogram and make yourself get stronger with that. Whether it's too heavy or it's too light, you're going to learn important lessons from that. If it's too heavy, you'll have to get creative with how you program frequency and progressions. If it's too light, then same thing. You're going to have to get creative with how you program frequency or find ways to disadvantage yourself, right? Mm-hmm.
So there's one here from, is it Raju, about pull-ups? Hey, Pat and Jim, DCRM.
Yeah, go ahead and read it. I'll try and pull it up.
So, hey, Pat and Jim, I came across a podcast where Pavel suggested that heavy weighted pull-ups up to sets of 5 is enough to increase total number of pull-ups. Your thoughts? Experientially, I agree. And this is actually K Black thinks this too. Like K Black from Tactical Barbell. For his people, when they need to get their pull-up numbers up for like a military test or something, he recommends doing a couple cycles of very heavy pull-ups. He thinks you then need to do some work of body weight to convert to that strength, into endurance, right? And I tell you, I think my all-time best on pull-ups is 24, 23, 24. And I did it only after I had been stuck at like 18, 19 for years. And then I just went to war and got to where I could do a double with the beast, right? And then it took a couple of weeks to get used to doing sets of pull-ups again, and boom, went up to like 23, 24, right? So experientially, it did work for me that way, right? To just get stronger at the lift, and then do an endurance phase, and you'll see a bump, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He claims the same with push-ups. I haven't tried it, right? Get a big bench, then do a bunch of endurance work, and you'll see your push-up number go up.
Yeah, I agree with this. The vast majority of my pull-up work, I talked about this recently with Dan John, is super sub-maximal, right? Yep. So it's, occasionally heavy, but generally like 5 to 6 reps, which is actually quite easy for me. I'm kind of again, I always have to qualify this so I don't sound supremely arrogant, because there's a lot of things I'm really bad at, but pull-ups I'm really good at.
I find like max sets of bodyweight pull-ups burn me out big time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like fighter pull-up does not do that great for me. Right?
Yeah. So I'm with you. It's always good to, strength helps kind of like increase the size of the bucket potential, but you still need to kind of fill that bucket up by doing, higher rep endurance work, at least occasionally.
Yeah.
At least occasionally.
And this is the tactical barbell theme, is you have phases in your year. You spend most of your year in mainly strength focus, but then you spend maybe 2 months, 6 weeks, 8 weeks in an entire endurance focus, right? Fill that endurance tank up, go get stronger, right? Endurance tanks go down, strength goes up, repeat the process, right? And you always kind of stay in equilibrium that way.
Yeah. Herb has a question, guys. Do you consider yourself genuine truth seekers considering dogma? It is an integral part of Catholicism. Thanks. It'd be amazing if I said no to this. I mean, part of me like has to like pull in my background a little bit. Like, I'm a convert, right? So I became Catholic at the end of the day because I think that it's true. And, let's get clear on the dogma thing. What is dogma? Well, it's an extension of the doctrine of indefectibility, which is an extension from the understanding that God gave us an authoritative institution that he providentially guides to make sure it doesn't totally screw us over on matters that are utterly essential. That's all it is, right? So if you think that makes sense, that you can trust the authority of the church, then it makes sense to trust in dogma. Like, makes sense, is a rational thing to do, even if you don't understand all the ins and outs of the dogma. Now, there's a number of steps and arguments you need to make to get up to that, but I don't see an incompatibility between dogma and being reasonable. And in fact, if you work yourself up to the point where you think that there is justice such authority, it would then become unreasonable to not accept the dogma, right?
Yep.
So, yeah.
I mean, a lot of this falls back into what we were talking about earlier with tradition and stuff like that. But leaving that aside, well, one, I think there could be a deal breaker for me. Okay, we've talked about this in the show before. Is like, I think the whole thing could be shown. I could be shown to be wrong, and I don't necessarily know what the condition of that is, but I'm willing to hold my tradition as responsible to reality, to the world, right? Okay. Two, one of the ways I think about this is, if indeed like you're committed to something, right, independently of the reasons for it, I think you're more likely to objectively evaluate the arguments.
Right.
You know what I mean? If you're already committed to the conclusion, and you're like, well, look, I don't need a good argument for this one way or another, right? Okay. Then I think you're in a position to more objectively evaluate the arguments. And we've talked about this on the show before, like how I don't really see a terribly strong argument against the ordination of women, but yet I hold the position, right? I'm not claiming contrary to the church. I'm just saying I don't see a terribly good argument for it. You see that? And that does not lead me to go back and like try to like believe a certain argument is a good argument. You know what I mean? I think it's because of the commitment to the church on that. I'm not just that one. I don't want to get into it, but that one particular issue liberates me to actually look at what the better reason is.
Yeah. Right.
Because my commitment doesn't hang in the balance.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I think you might be the most objective observer of your spouse, right?
Yeah.
Because you're committed one way or another, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I actually, oddly, I think dogma or like commitment can make you more objective about something.
No, I agree. In fact, my friend Mike Matthews, who's got his Muscle for Life podcast, he says he always asks people, or often asks people on his podcast, what's something that would convince you that you're wrong? And he said to me on the phone the other day, I'm like literally one of the only people who had a ready answer for him on that, right? Of all the people he asked, most of them are not religious. And I said, look, like I've thought about this, right? Like if there was a Vatican III and the church in authority denied the Trinity, I'd have to put my hands up and be like, I was wrong. I was, and like, this is such an important epistemological thing. Like, no matter what your commitment is, you have to be, Jim, we've talked about this a million times, so I don't want to repeat it too much. You have to be willing to admit there's some threshold, right? There's some threshold where, you would have to seriously question, if not abandon, what your commitments are. And if you don't have that in view, at least like vaguely drawn, at least, then you have to kind of question of whether you even hold to anything meaningful in the first place, right?
So I think we have to begin by deferring responsibility for our belief onto something outside of us, onto a tradition. We have to offload onto a tradition, right? But at some point we have to onload back, right? We have to take responsibility for it. And if there's just no conditions under which I would leave something, then I'm not taking any responsibility for it whatsoever, right? And it's not a tradition, it's a cult then. Right.
Yeah, spot on. All right, Jim, you get in here with help picking these questions with me, because I've just completely lost.
Asked, this is Robaz 121.
Okay.
I have a question for both of you as authors. What's your stance with regards to online book sites where you can download ebooks without paying for them? And are there any circumstances which can make, there must be another part of it. But let me just say about those.
Make them allowable.
Yeah, it's theft. Don't do it. Right. I mean, this is
what did Lars Ulrich say? Right.
Yeah. Right. I mean, look, just, when I write a book, it's a 10-year endeavor. Right. And I'll say this, like say, for instance, my first book came out through Catholic University Press. Okay. And I make almost no money on that thing. Right. I mean, I get like $1 a copy. Right. And it's not selling hundreds. A Philosophy of Mind book is not selling hundreds of thousands of copies. Right. And so what you're really doing is you're wrecking the press. You're not wrecking me. Right. Like I get my end of it through like the prestige the book gets. Right. Okay. But you're ruining CUA Press, right? Because they need to sell that book to stay open. And if they don't stay open, that book doesn't happen. Right. It doesn't get, you know what I mean? So I think one of the things that people miss is like, okay, one thing, you're not always stealing, right, from some evil corporate entity. You might be stealing from a nonprofit organization that is doing the world a service by making sure good things end up in print.
Yeah.
Do you see that? I think that's an important thing to note, right? And just in general, even leaving that aside, Pat Flynn feeds his kids with this, right? You know what I mean? If you download those things, you are stealing from Pat Flynn, right? And that man worked hard to do that. It cost him something to do that. Do you know what I mean? So I think that you shouldn't do this.
Yeah. Just, be an upstanding person, right? Realize that professionals deserve to be paid for their work. Yeah. And I'm not going to say I worked that hard.
Right.
I'm kidding. No, I have worked probably too hard on my books. I should be embarrassed how hard I've worked on some of my books versus how they came out.
You worked very hard.
Right. But right. Yeah. Professionals just deserve to be paid for the work. That's as kind of as simple as that. Even if the royalties are paltry 13 cents a copy. Yeah. Right.
I've gotten it now too. Like I will not even like seriously pirate something to distribute to my students. Right. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like, hey, that person who wrote that, made a living doing that, and these people should pay for the access to it.
Look, even people that I have on the show, like, they offer to send me their books, and no, I'll buy it. Bought it. Like, I spend more money on books than I think anything, aside from things related to my kids. Oh, gosh. I do. Just enormous amounts. But to me, nothing seems a better or more worthwhile investment.
I can't wait to run downstairs and see those 2 books waiting on my front porch, I hope.
Yeah, always. There's like a new book or 2 every day, from Amazon. In fact, it does become a little problematic at some point, probably. As my wife frequently reminds me. Horseman says, any rock metal bands you recommend? Oh boy, where do we get started here?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, all-timers okay. Let's just say kind of what we're into at the moment. Right. Mm-hmm. And I've been really digging a band, that I've liked. I was into them like 10 years ago. I just kind of rediscovered them. Government Mule. Is one of the original Allman Brothers was in there. Right. And it's just a good blues rock band. Right. With very, very interesting, like very heavy, interesting lyrics. Yeah. So check out Government Mule.
Boy, where do I'm like overwhelmed by this question because I'm such a hardcore music fan, right? If you're looking for who have I been listening to lately, let's start there. Well, I love Paul Gilbert as a guitarist. He played for Mr. Big 90s band. I'm the one who wants to be with you. Every other song aside from that is actually fantastic. So I love his solo work recently. He's got an incredible album called Behold Electric Guitar. It's just pure musical bliss, but it's kind of like a guitarist type of thing. So if you're not into that, you might not like Gilbert. I've always been, if you like prog rock, I've always been a pretty big fan of Dream Theater. They just came out with a new album that I'm about to dive into. Haven't heard of it yet. I like really just good technical stuff a lot. In terms of like old thrash metal, this will trigger people. I've always been more of a Megadeth than a Metallica guy. I'll tell you what, religion can stir up some debates, but if you drop a bomb like that on Twitter, Jim, it's yeah. Who else? I mean, AC/DC, going back to my childhood, I'll always love AC/DC, but everybody already knows them. So I'm trying to think of like some stuff that you might not have listened to. I would check out Paul Gilbert. If you're just into like just good technical soulful musicianship, and Dream Theater, kind of like their earlier 2000 albums, I think are all just absolutely spectacular. 100%. Mm-hmm. All right, what else is catching your eye here, Jim?
Let's see, what do we got here? I'm gonna go way back in here.
Go way back. Somebody asked what your favorite Tool album is related to music.
Okay, I think recently now it has become Lateralis.
Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Classic.
Oh, yeah. Let's see.
Somebody asked me to explain the extrinsic model of divine simplicity. I'm putting a link in there. That is, and I've done many episodes on that. So I would say, if you want me to explain and defend the extrinsic model of divine simplicity, search my name and John DeRosa, search my name and Gavin Kerr, and check out the Substack link below, and you'll find the resources there. We'll take a few more here.
This one here or not.
Brendan says Metallica's early stuff stands up. So I'm a little controversial on Metallica. I'm actually like a 90s Metallica guy.
And I have a good buddy I train with who's like, it started with the Black Album, right?
Yeah, like, I get it. Ride the Lightning, Kill 'Em All. Like, this was like early thrash metal. But the truth is like, once you kind of become like once you get into Dream Theater and stuff like that, it's hard to go back to Metallica because they just can't compete on the relevant things anymore. They can't compete on, and not like they were trying to. Obviously, they have the disadvantage of coming much earlier. But then when you get to 90s Metallica, that holds up because it's just so much chunkier. It's so much funkier. I feel like they kind of came like more into a well-rounded band. Like I love the Load and Reload albums. I love those albums. And that's the Metallica I listen to these days. I almost never listen to earlier Metallica anymore.
One of their more recent albums where they had kind of gone back to the earlier feel, but it was still in shorter format songs. It was something
I have not kept up with
Electric something. It was an interesting album, but I'm not the biggest Metallica fan, right? So Max had asked about my favorite Tool album, and also any thoughts about A Perfect Circle. You know, I have not really gotten totally into Perfect Circle, and it's sort of like I kind of want it to be Tool, right? And I think Maynard is like, well, I've got Tool to do Tool, and in a Perfect Circle, I'm doing Perfect Circle, right? You know, but I will check out 13th Step again, Max, on your recommendation now. Yeah.
Have any of you gentlemen tried intermittent fasting? We are both quite avid intermittent fasters, actually. Jim, what's your current fasting protocol look like these days?
Eat as rarely as freaking possible. Right? No, so I on a typical day, my last meal is at 4:30 in the afternoon, and by meal I mean that's a snack. Okay, so my first meal is typically after 12 p.m. And then it's on. I'm eating then, right? Okay, and then I will stop having any kind of intake at all at 4:30. I will typically then train jujitsu for a couple hours, right? Not long after that, I'll go to bed. I'll get up. I'll work out in the morning, right? And then wait till noon the next day to eat, right? So almost all of my activity, serious activity, happens in that fast, right? And so what is that? That's typically 18-hour fast?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's more intense than what I'm doing. Yeah.
And then once a week, I don't eat. I just have a day where I don't eat. Right.
You just do the full 24-hour fast.
Go full 24. Yeah. Dinner to dinner. Right.
That's
and
awesome.
I keep my activity at the same level, stuff like that. I love it. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. You really do grow to love it. Like you grow to love kind of like the feeling of being on the hunt with hunger. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
man, if I eat breakfast now, I feel like a bloated, disgusting Jabba the Hutt.
I'm with you. It just slows me down for the most part. Like I could have like some light protein, like maybe like 2 hard-boiled eggs or just some whey protein mixed in water. I'm one of those guys where like if it's gross, it doesn't bother me. Like I'm totally fine just taking flavorless protein powder, stirring it in water, chugging it down. Right. No big deal, right? I don't need a full smoothie or anything like that. So like when and if I eat breakfast, that's pretty much the extent of it. But otherwise, I have my fasting cycles. Well, they are cycles, right? So I have some days where I'm fasting more intensely. Like today, I've had a little bit of light protein. I'll have pretty much just eggs for dinner because we don't even do meats on Friday. So this will be like a very kind of light eating day for me. And then I typically boost calories a bit more on the weekend. So I kind of have like 5 days that are relatively more intense, and usually 2 days within there are even especially intense.
Yeah.
And then 2 days, usually Saturday and Sunday, where I still eat healthy. I just kind of boost my caloric intake a little bit. Yeah.
And I mean, for me, it's just become I just don't get hungry now till late in the day.
Yeah.
I just don't. I mean, it's just become. The way Mark Sisson puts it, eat when, and he means that when hunger eventually, or when hunger emerges naturally, right? That's basically when I eat. So if I find myself just starving, unable to concentrate at 10 o'clock in the morning, then I eat then, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, I'm not interested in it, really interested in eating until afternoon now.
Yeah. Here's a interesting question. Sam says, should we underplay Catholic spiritual experiences if there are other people in different religions who have a profound experience, miracle happen to them? Would that put religious experiences inside normal materialist experiences, as some scholars claim? So let me see if I'm getting this right. My general response is no, right? Because we can make a distinction between an authentic religious experience and a reliable religious experience. The authentic experience means like this really is a religious experience related to some transcendent entity, but I may have gone wrong on the level of interpretation. I might not have gotten all the details right, etc. A reliable religious experience is accurate in its interpretation and its details. And I think actually this is important in terms of like worldviews with tensions, because obviously religious mystical experiences are very broad. So I think you should favor a worldview that can say, yeah, this does happen outside of just one tradition, right? And of course, the Catholic worldview allows for that. So I think that's a reason. And the Catholic worldview, in a general sense, doesn't say like everything else is wrong all the way through, or that God's grace can't act in any other tradition. In fact, the church says no. There's a lot of truths out there. God's grace is operative everywhere, right? So I think that's actually something that coheres again better with the Catholic tradition than elsewhere. I think if you look seriously into mystical and religious experiences like near-death experiences, I honestly think they're a death blow for materialist worldviews. Like I think they're absolutely devastating for anybody who like rolls up their sleeves and looks at the actual good scholarly research in these things.
Yeah, and once again, this is a going thing here. I think that we need to distinguish between religion and the metaphysics of and religion and metaphysics, right? I mean, so I think you could admit like that there's divinity, and the human nervous system is in a dialectical relationship with its environment, and among the things that are in its environment are divine entities. Okay, and therefore there's going to be experience of divinity for humans, at least the ones that are able to pull it off perceptually. Okay, right. Do you see that? So yeah, there's going to be religious experiences irrespective of the religious tradition. Do you see that? Okay. But then the other question of like how we evaluate who's in terms of their actual content or getting it right. That's a different kind of question. Do you see what I mean? So I don't think there's any need to underplay or overplay. This seems to be a fact about human beings, that we're perceptually set up to communicate with things, right, that are not just middle-sized dried goods. Do you know what I mean? Which I agree with you is a death knell to materialism in a way, right?
Right. Yeah. Dude, this is in your new book, because if so, I'm really pumped for your developed thoughts on all these types of
like stuff on like religious experience like that. It's not in there, but the book is a sustained attempt to sort of defend mindedness as tradition based, and the undermined tradition is the source of our contemporary nihilism.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, Jim, you get to pick the final question for today.
Last one, huh?
As always, amazing stuff here, guys. Really, thank you for contributing. If we didn't get to your question, apologies. There's always next time. We do this every week. Please please share, please comment for the algorithm.
Yeah, by all means.
By all means. Jim gets the final pick here.
Try to find one here.
Then I'm going to go read more Marxist literature.
Oh, I love this one. Don't want to get you in trouble. Not like that, right?
Always a good start to a question.
Any thoughts on growing overreach of big tech, Apple, Google, right? And if you've researched moving to alternatives. Well, I'll leave the moving alternative stuff to Pat, but any thoughts on growing overreach of big tech? Only a fool would not be worried about this, right? Only a fool would not be worried about this, right? Now let's note, big tech has enabled us to have this conversation, right?
Right.
But big tech would very much like to manage this conversation, right?
And sometimes they do.
Yeah.
I'm very much concerned. I think it's something that really needs to be fought against, and I would hope it's something that like the vast majority of people could come together from wherever you fall on the political spectrum and realize like, yeah, this is just not something that anybody should be particularly happy about, right?
Yeah. We have been duped into making the private public.
Yes, right? We have.
That has been the big dupe, is we've been duped into making the private public, right? There are so many conversations that we all have every day, whether it's through Facebook messaging or I guess Twitter direct messaging or Zoom or what have you, that we think are private that in fact are not, right? And that is a worry. Right?
Yeah.
And then just to make us dependent on these things that someone else owns in order for us to have discourse has inherently left a possibility of the management of discourse in a way that is very, very worrisome.
Yeah, great thoughts. As for alternatives, I don't know, man. Look, if you're like a business owner, the thing I've always tell people is like, get a good email list. That's a no-brainer, but that's always been a no-brainer, even before the overreach, because you'd just be a fool to let your livelihood depend on like the magical whims of an algorithm, right? So yeah, email lists. But I know people that for various totally unjustified reasons were banned from social media platforms, but they had a good email list, so they're able to still communicate with their fan base and followers. So for business owners, I recommend that. For the general public, I don't know, man. I haven't really explored a lot of the alternatives, so I can't speak. But if people have recommendations, I'm happy to hear it. I'm all ears. Yeah.
Okay. The best alternative would be able to survive without it.
Indeed.
Do you know what I mean? So yeah. So if I got kicked off of social media, it would suck. You know, Pat and I couldn't jam, right? You know, but I'm still gonna go downstairs and read Dugan. Right? Okay. I'm still gonna, you know what I mean? I'm still gonna go do what I'm doing. Right. And like the really important stuff to me, I won't let it. I will not let the really, really super essential stuff be mediated to me through someone else's social media filter.
That's critical, right? So if I got banned on all social media platforms, it would be annoying, but it wouldn't be devastating.
Right. Right. It'd be I'd miss Pat, man. I'd miss you.
Yeah, but we'd hop on the phone, we'd drive down, we'd jam. Yeah.
I wrote my kid a hard copy letter, handwritten, every day he was in boot camp. Right.
Yeah.
I'll go. Right. You know what I mean? So yeah, we'll communicate. Yeah. And so I just think we have to be willing to say we refuse to be dependent on you. Now I'm dependent on Amazon to get my books and stuff like that. Okay, but the degree to which we can say we are refusing to be dependent on these, especially the social media stuff that wants to curate what we can talk about, right? We have to refuse to be dependent on that to think, right? Right. That we have to like start cultivating our own libraries, our own, you know, conversation partners, our own patterns of thought and stuff. So you don't need Twitter or YouTube to think, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well said. All right, we're going to close out here. Awesome Freaky Friday. As always, gentle listeners, thank you for the superb questions. Please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting before we get banned here.
Before we get banned.
And we'll catch you guys on the next episode. Adios.